"Sir, this isn't a gift shop," the yacht manager said, his tone coated with sugar and something sharper. "That's not a real black card." A wave of laughter rolled across the private deck. Someone near the champagne bar muttered, "Guess he brought props to look the part." Click. The sound of a phone camera capturing the moment, not discreetly, not kindly. The way someone would film a magician caught using fake tricks at a billionaire's gala. Have you ever stood in a place where everyone wore smiles but not a single one was friendly? That's exactly where he stood. The yacht gleamed like a floating palace under the Mediterranean sun, chrome railings, crystal glasses clinking, perfume mixed with sea salt. But in that moment, everything turned cold. The man they were mocking stood still, tall, silent, wearing a soft navy shirt. Sleeves rolled precisely, not a wrinkle out of place, no entourage, no flashy logos, just calm and uninvited stillness. He didn't respond, and that made them bolder. "That's not even titanium," someone said, pointing at his card. "Amazon sells replicas. You can get one for $50. Another round of chuckles. Do you know that feeling when you're being laughed at by people who think they'll never have to respect you? It's a special kind of rage. The one that doesn't boil over, it freezes. It waits. From the far end of the deck, a tall man with white hair raised his flute and smirked. His voice sliced through the air. "Let him stay. This is better than the opera." The crowd laughed again. He could have walked away. He could have saved himself from the humiliation, from the burning stares, from the hands hovering over iPhones like wolves circling a wounded lion. But instead he looked up, and then one tiny shift. He took a step forward, not toward the door, not toward the bar, not even toward the smirking guest who turned him into the afternoon's entertainment. No, he stepped toward the center of the yacht, the part reserved for billionaires. The exact spot where no one thought he belonged. That's when the laughter stopped, not because he shouted, but because he didn't. He was about to do something that would turn this insult into a corporate earthquake, and no one saw it coming. Let me ask you, have you ever been mocked so casually that you wondered if silence was your only power? Or have you ever felt something burn inside the need to show them exactly who they're laughing at? If yes, or even just maybe type car below. I'm curious who else has been here. But stay close, because what he said next, it wasn't loud, but it changed the course of a $3.8 billion deal. And that wasn't even the worst part. He moved without a word. One step, then another. A hush slid over the yacht, like wind before a coming storm. No one told him to stop, but their eyes screamed it. They watched, frozen halfway through laughter, unsure whether to smirk or stand. His shoes, dark brown leather, echoed softly against the polished teak, not hurried, not apologetic. He passed the man who mocked him, Bradley Carver, partner in the maritime investment firm throwing this elite celebration. The man who raised his glass like a judge lifting a gavel. Bradley muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Must have left his invite back in the mailroom. A few chuckles slipped out, but not like before. This time there was hesitation. The black man didn't flinch. Instead, he walked straight to the marble bar at the yacht's center, a place reserved for founders, owners, dealmakers, not someone whose black card was laughed at 5 minutes ago. The bartender, the young one who defended him earlier, stood tall when he arrived. "Can I offer you something, sir?" she asked, voice steady, but eyes scanning the room, afraid someone might stop her. He nodded. Sparkling water, cold. She poured it like it was champagne. By now, the deck was watching, not laughing, not smiling, just watching. A few phones slowly lowered. The joke was over, but no one knew why they weren't laughing anymore. He took a sip, then he reached into his pocket. Out came a slim titanium case. No logos, just steel. He set it on the counter with a soft click. It was the kind of sound that made people lean in without knowing why. From the case, he slid a single item, not another card, a letter. He unfolded it carefully, as if it had weight beyond paper. A signature glinted at the bottom. Another logo, small, discreet, sat in the corner. And yet, anyone in the business world would know it in an instant. The logo belonged to the Acadia Group, the holding firm currently finalizing a $3.8 billion acquisition of Seabright Maritime, the very company hosting the celebration. No words, no announcement, just the letter resting there, beside his water. Bradley's smirk faltered, then vanished. He stepped forward. "That's not what I think it is," he said, eyes narrowing. The man finally spoke. "Depends what you think it is." The words weren't angry. They weren't loud. But something about the way he said them made even the waves outside pause. The bartender looked down at the letter, then back at him, then up at Bradley. She realized something before anyone else on that deck. They weren't the ones in control anymore. Someone whispered, "Wait, is he part of Acadia?" Another voice more urgent, "He is not part of it, he runs it." A ripple spread, quiet gasps, nervous glances. And all he did was take another sip of water. The game had just shifted, and not one of them was ready for what he'd do next. Because that letter, it wasn't just a statement of power. It was a loaded gun, and he was about to pull the trigger. Bradley stepped closer, the color in his face shifting from pink to pale. His hand hovered over the letter, as if touching it might confirm a nightmare. This deal's already cleared," he said. "Acadia's signed last quarter. You're bluffing." The man didn't blink. He simply tapped the spot near the bottom of the letter, a new signature, fresh ink, above it. A time-stamped clause that hadn't been there before. "Pending final authorization," he said calmly. "Mine." A slow-motion collapse rippled through Bradley's composure. His posture stiffened. His eyes flicked toward the guests, searching for support. But all he saw were uncertain stares and shifting feet. The music had stopped playing minutes ago. No one noticed when. It just faded. And now, the only sound on deck was the breeze tickling the sails and the hum of realization spreading through the crowd. He could have stopped there. He could have enjoyed their discomfort, their quiet unraveling. But instead, he did something no one expected. He stood up straighter, set his glass down, and reached for his phone. A tapped A swipe, a call placed on speaker. "Marion," he said, when the voice answered. "Yes, sir," came the crisp reply. "Terminate the Seabright deal. Effective immediately. Move the capital to Atlantic Horizon. Triple the stake." Bradley's mouth fell open. His hand dropped. "No, you can't just." But the voice on the phone continued. "Copy that, executing transfer. Confirming market alert for Monday." The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't need to. The silence hit harder. They knew what that meant. Atlantic Horizon was Seabright's direct competitor, smaller, faster, hungrier, with a single call. He hadn't just canceled a $3.8 billion acquisition. He'd repositioned it to their rival, and done it in front of the very people who laughed at him. Bradley tried one last line of defense. "This is a misunderstanding. We were just having a bit of fun. Nobody meant offense." The man turned. "No misunderstanding," he said. "You were very clear." He looked around the yacht, at every face that had laughed, at every camera still pointed his way, now recording not a joke but a reckoning. Then he walked back toward the exit. No security, no raised voice, just calm, deliberate steps. But as he passed the bar again, he paused, reached into his pocket one last time, pulled out the black card they'd mocked. He set it gently on the counter, beside the untouched water. "Keep it," he said to the bartender. "Maybe one day someone else shows up and you won't hesitate." And then, without a backward glance, he was gone. But the chaos, that was just about to begin. By the time he stepped onto the dock, the air behind him had changed. No more laughter, only the weight of what had just happened settling over the yacht like storm clouds. That arrived too late to warn anyone. Inside, the guests were silent, not out of guilt, not yet, but confusion, shock, the kind of stillness that follows an explosion, too sudden to process. Bradley Carver stood motionless, the letter still on the bar, his hands clenched at his sides. 3 decades of deals, a career built on charm and intimidation. And in under 10 minutes, He'd been outmaneuvered not by another investor, but by the man he dismissed as a nobody. With a shiny card, one of the junior analysts leaned toward him, whispering, "Sir, the press is already boasting. Someone leaked the footage. It's on 3 channels." Bradley didn't respond. The bartender, the only one who'd spoken up earlier, still stood at her post. She stared at the black card he left behind, not because she wanted it, but because something about it felt heavier now, like a reminder, like a mirror. She glanced toward the guests. None dared pick it up. That moment, right there, that was the real shift. He hadn't needed to shout, or threaten, or flaunt. He let the truth speak and walked away. You might be watching this while commuting, folding laundry, maybe even trying to take a break from the day. And if so, I get it, life's busy. But if you've been following the story and you don't want to miss what happened after the yacht, where the ripple hit the media, the boardrooms, and even his past, you might want to hit subscribe now. Because what comes next, it turns personal. Far from the coast, in a quiet boardroom 3 states away, a CEO's name lit up a monitor. Emails flooded in. Investors questioned everything. Some demanded answers. One subject line read, "Urgent, did we just lose Acadia?" That was just the start. The man they laughed at, he was just getting started. And before long, the world would learn why he didn't just walk away in silence, but carried every insult like fuel. The ripple didn't stop at the yacht. By morning, it had become a wave crashing through inboxes, trading rooms, and legal departments from Monaco to Manhattan. News outlets picked it up fast. Black CEO cancels $3.8 billion deal after yacht and sold exclusive footage inside. The headline alone was gasoline. Within hours, snippets from the yacht, the laughter, the dismissive comments, the calm termination of the deal were trending under the hashtag "not just a card." For some, it was a moment of vindication. For others, a warning shot. And for Bradley Carver, it was the beginning of a very public unraveling. He tried to spin the story first. He called it a misunderstanding, a social hiccup, a PR exaggeration. But footage doesn't lie, and neither does the silence of partners backing away one by one. Inside Seabright's headquarters, panic began to set in. 3 key investors froze their funds. A strategic partner postponed the next round of financing. And most damning of all, Acadia's withdrawal opened a hole in the deal no one else could fill. What stunned them most wasn't the loss of money. It was how calculated it all seemed after the fact. Because this wasn't random. The man they had mocked didn't just happen to be on that yacht. He'd been invited weeks ago anonymously, through an intermediary, as part of a VIP experience offered to high-value clients. He knew exactly where he was going, and exactly who would be there. He hadn't just walked into their world by accident. He'd walked in with a plan. But what no one outside the boat understood was that this wasn't the first time someone tried to laugh him out of a room. Not even close. Back in his 20s, he'd once been denied an interview because his name didn't sound executive enough. He'd been mistaken for a valet in a boardroom lobby he was supposed to present in. He'd been told, to his face, that men like you don't make it past middle management unless they play by someone else's script. But he'd stopped playing by those rules a long time ago. The yacht was never about revenge for one insult. It was about reminding the system that power no longer looks the way they expect it to. And now that reminder was on full display for millions. In corner offices, in group chats, in closed-door meetings with frantic lawyers. They weren't asking whether he was bluffing anymore. They were asking who else might be holding back like him, and who might be next to walk in with a smile and leave with a building. Because this time, it wasn't just about a black card. It was about everything that came after. 3 days later, his name was everywhere. Not just on the business channels, but the front page of major papers, viral threads on social media. Even talk shows that normally stayed away from corporate drama. But this wasn't drama. This was a reckoning. Interviews were requested, panels assembled. Former colleagues suddenly remembered him, some with praise, some with caution. And yet, he accepted none of it. Not the interviews, not the applause. He stayed quiet until one message reached his inbox. A short, bland email with an all too familiar subject line. Ray, potential partnership opportunity Remtech Capital. He didn't need to read it to remember. Remtech, the firm where, years ago, he'd apply for a senior analyst role and was told, in a meeting he was never supposed to overhear, that his appearance might be a distraction to clients. They hadn't said black. They hadn't needed to. They used phrases like doesn't project legacy stability and off-brand energy. He still remembered the elevator ride down the day, the walls of glass, the feeling of being visible, but not seen. Now, they were excited to collaborate. He replied with a single line, "Glad to see your brand has evolved." No signature, no follow-up. They never replied. But the pass wasn't done knocking, because the next invitation he received wasn't from a company. It was from a university. The university that had once rejected his MBA application without explanation. Now, they wanted him to speak on resilience and modern leadership. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called a name he hadn't spoken in years. His mother. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, baby," she said. "I saw the news. You okay?" "I'm good," he replied, just thinking. There was a pause on the line. Then she said something she used to say when he came home frustrated from high school debate meets. "They don't have to clap for you. They just have to hear you." He didn't speak for a while after that, because he was starting to realize this moment wasn't about headlines or revenge or reminding old firms that he'd made it. It was about something else. About how many others still walked into boardrooms carrying the same silence he used to. About what might happen if someone broke that silence and didn't apologize for it. The yacht had sparked something, not just in the media, but in others. He was starting to get letters, real ones, from young professionals, from assistants, from interns, from people who'd been told, in 100 coded ways, that they didn't fit. Some just wrote thank you. Others sent full-pages stories of lost jobs, skipped promotions, rooms they never belonged to. He read every one, because he knew what it meant to carry talent and still be denied the key. But now the lock had changed, and he wasn't the only one holding a copy. It was a Wednesday morning when he walked into the building. Not a yacht, not a gala. Just a simple steel glass office tower in Midtown, one he knew too well. He passed it hundreds of times, sometimes with bitterness, sometimes with resolve. But never like this. The security guard at the front desk looked up. "Good morning, sir," she said, a little too fast recognition flashing in her eyes. "Can I help you?" He nodded, handed over his ID. The screen blinked once, then greenlit. "I'm here for the 10:30. The guard checked the list. Her eyebrows lifted, but she said nothing. Just gestured toward the elevator. "Top floor. They're expecting you." He stepped inside the elevator, alone. As the doors closed, he looked at the reflection in the brushed metal walls. No tie, no briefcase. Just the same man they'd once labeled unfit for client exposure. But he wasn't here as a client anymore. He was here as a buyer. 37 floors up, the room was already tense. The partners of Remtech Capital sat around a polished walnut table, water bottles sweating under the boardroom lights. Bradley Carver wasn't there. His resignation had gone public the day before. But others were. Men and women in tailored suits, the same ones who'd once ghosted his regime, now waited on his words. He walked in without a word, nodded once to the assistant who tried to offer him coffee. "No need." Then he took his seat at the far end of the table, the one reserved for the lead. A few people shuffled their notes. One partner cleared her throat. "We understand there have been complications in recent weeks, public perception being what it is. We'd like to move forward quickly." He said nothing. The woman pressed on. "We're prepared to revisit terms, higher equity, less dilution, and we're open to a joint statement to guide the narrative back towards stability." Still silence. Then he reached into his jacket. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a folder. Inside, a new proposal. Not for partnership, for acquisition. Flat-out purchase, terms non-negotiable. The partner across from him blinked. You want to buy Remtech? He nodded. Once. Another partner scoffed quietly. You think that's realistic? He finally spoke. I think it's overdue. They sat in stunned silence. Because on paper, yes, it was realistic. He had the capital, the backing, the leverage. But more than that, he had the attention of the public. And they had the opposite. He stood, slid the folder across the table, and looked each person in the eye. You built a system where certain people were never meant to sit here. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. But I didn't come to join it. I came to rewrite it. Then he turned to leave. One partner called out, "What do we tell the board?" He paused at the door. "Tell them the room's about to look very different." And he walked out, leaving behind a table full of power, suddenly aware that it had shifted completely. The board didn't take long to respond. By Friday afternoon, the headlines were impossible to ignore. Remtech faces takeover amid public backlash and leadership shakeup. New power, old gatekeepers, will they let go? The man with the card now holds the pen. The narrative had shifted, not just around him, but around what leadership looked like. Inside Remtech's offices, whispers filled the halls. Assistants paused longer at the water cooler. Managers closed their doors more quietly. Some tried to act as if nothing had changed. Others started clearing their desks. In less than a week, he had gone from outsider to owner-elect. But he didn't celebrate. Not publicly, not privately. Instead, he walked the halls, silently, watched the looks from employees, some wide-eyed with awe, others tight-lipped with uncertainty. He recognized both expressions. He'd worn them once. He paused at the corner window, the same spot where, years ago, he'd waited for an interview that never came. The view hadn't changed, but he had. Behind him, a voice spoke. "I didn't expect you to accept the deal," said a man in a gray suit, older, familiar. He turned. It was the same senior partner who once walked past him in the lobby without a glance back, when he was just the young analyst hopeful. Now the man's tone was careful, too careful. "I know we've had differences," the partner said, "but I hope you'll consider continuity. There's value in preserving legacy." He looked at him, then out the window again, and when he replied, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was quiet, almost gentle. "You thought legacy meant keeping the door closed." A pause. "I'm here to build a bigger one." The partner didn't respond. Because what could he say? That he was wrong. That he didn't see it coming. That a man they'd once dismissed as optically risky now owned the building they worked in. No statement would fix that. So he turned and walked away. And as the man stood there looking out over the skyline, he realized legacy wasn't something you inherit. It was something you build. And sometimes something you tear down first. Elsewhere, the headlines continued. Young professionals began referencing his name in cover letters. A popular magazine featured him on its next issue with only 3 words beneath his photo. Uninvited, unapologetic, unstoppable. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was what came next. Because acquiring Remtech wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. And for the first time, the room wasn't closed. It was wide open, and people were already lining up at the door. It started small. A single email from a law student in Detroit. Then a DM from a woman in Lagos who'd been passed over twice for the same job, while training the men who got it. Then hundreds more. By the end of the week, his foundation's inbox had received over 12,000 messages, not from fans, not from donors, but from builders. People who'd seen the clip on the yacht, read the articles, watch what he did with Remtech, and realize maybe, just maybe, the rules they've been following weren't laws, just illusions. He read each message with care, not because he needed the praise, but because in every line, he saw who he used to be. One email simply said, "They laughed at my voice. I changed my tone. Not anymore." Another, "My mother told me, don't cause trouble at work. Now I wonder what if causing trouble is the only way it gets better." He didn't reply to all of them, but he did something else. He called a meeting, not with lawyers, not with board members, with architects, designers, engineers, community planners. And in a small office on the edge of the city, he unveiled something that had been sitting in his mind far longer than the Remtech acquisition. A plan, a physical space, not just a headquarters, a campus, an institute for underrepresented founders, creators, and strategists. A place where the rules weren't legacy codes, but rewritten frameworks, where professional didn't mean palatable and leadership didn't mean who came first. The room went quiet after he finished. Then one of the architects, a black woman with silver braids and a voice like gravel, leaned forward and said, "Where?" He smiled. "Next to the same schools that didn't want me. They built fast." He funded quietly, no press release, no ribbon cutting, no interviews. But word still spread, and soon others began showing up. Some famous, some invisible until now. They didn't come to network. They came to build, to ask questions they've been punished for asking elsewhere, to test ideas dismissed as too bold, too radical, or not on brand. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about velocity. And when reporters finally caught wind, one of them asked, "Why didn't you go public with this sooner?" He looked at the camera for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is build in silence." That line hit harder than any quote he'd ever given. It was printed on T-shirts, plastered on murals, painted across the entrance to the institute itself. Build in silence. And beneath it, etched in stone, one more sentence. For those who were told the room wasn't built for them. He never intended to become a symbol. But when the system tried to humiliate him with a laugh, he answered with a building. Bradley Carver sat alone at a cafe 2 blocks from his old office. Not the yacht club, not the private dining suites, just a sidewalk table, a bitter espresso, and a newspaper he pretended to read. His face once a fixture on conference panels, investment forums. Charity galas no longer appeared in the pages, not even an apology. He disappeared without a headline, just a footnote. After the yacht incident, his name had become a liability. First, the firm temporarily reassigned him. Then came the quiet retirement. No party, no legacy speech, just paperwork. A man who had once brokered billion-dollar deals now watched the world shift without him. He didn't blame the black man who ended his career. He blamed himself for assuming he never could. In his mind, he replayed the moment over and over, the black card on the marble bar, the unreadable calm on the CEO's face, the sound of silence replacing laughter. He laughed once. Now no one dared laugh with him. Across the city, the institute neared its full opening. Enrollment filled fast, not from ads, but word of mouth, hand to hand. Mentorships were formed, business plans drafted, teams built overnight. And among them were stories just like his, but with endings yet to be written. One evening, a journalist tried to contact the CEO for comment. She asked the receptionist if he would speak about the institute, about Remtech, about everything that had happened since that yacht. The receptionist smiled. "He doesn't do statements," she said. "He does systems." And that was the truth. While others played public relations, he played infrastructure. He wasn't trying to change minds. He was changing blueprints. And slowly, painfully, for some, the business world realized something. The old handshake deals, the insider circles, the nods that passed power from one legacy to another. They were dissolving. Because now, there was someone in the room who didn't need permission to build. And worse, he wasn't alone. In one boardroom, a young intern refused to fetch coffee for the 4th time and cited a policy he helped write. In another, an entry-level analyst corrected a senior VP and was backed up, not silenced. These weren't just echoes. They were signals. And the architects of the old rules, they couldn't understand why the ground beneath them felt so unstable. But it wasn't instability. It was foundation being re-poured with different hands. And the man who started it all, he didn't celebrate. He didn't wave banners. He didn't give TED Talks. He simply walked forward, while the world behind him tried to keep up. It was late, the kind of late where cities begin to hush, even the boldest horns go quiet, and the skyline itself seems to dim its pride. He sat alone on the balcony of his apartment, barefoot, a glass of still water in one hand. No assistants, no calls, no meetings left to prepare for. Just silence. The kind that doesn't ask questions but lets them arrive anyway. He looked out over the city towers rising, traffic pulsing far below. The faint glow of billboards repeating names louder than they deserve. His name was one of them now. He should have felt proud. But pride wasn't what sat with him. It was something older, softer, heavier. He thought about the kid version of himself, the one who stood outside classrooms, waiting for a teacher to open the locked door. The one who dressed a little too formally for every interview. The one who rehearsed how to sound more acceptable into a mirror. What would that boy think seeing this? Would he be proud or confused? Because success had come, but not in the way they told him it would. They'd said, work harder than everyone. He had. They'd said, stay humble. He did. They never said, they'll laugh at you while you're succeeding. But they did. The laugh wasn't what hurt. It was how normal it felt to them. How expected. That was what he changed. Not their opinions. Opinions are slow, slippery things. He changed what they feared. Because now, every time someone like him walks into a room, the air changes. Not because they're different, but because silence doesn't mean submission anymore. He took a long sip of water, eyes half closed, the wind brushing over his face. Somewhere far off, he could hear a saxophone playing through a window. An old tune, Miles Davis, maybe, or something older. And for a moment, he let himself drift. Not to memories, not to regret, but to possibility. He didn't need more power. He didn't want more control. What he wanted, what he'd always wanted, was simple. A room without laughter at the door. A table that didn't require translation. A place where no one had to shrink in order to be let in. He set his glass down. The wind carried the music away. And he stood. Because tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges, new invitations wrapped in expectations. But tonight, he'd rest. Not because the war was over, but because for once, he wasn't fighting alone. Months passed. The story faded from headlines. New scandals came. New billionaires rose. The algorithm moved on. But something had shifted, not loud. Not obvious, like a door that used to creak suddenly swinging open without sound. Inside offices that once felt like vaults, conversations grew sharper. Job listings quietly removed words like culture fit. Diversity budgets stopped being symbolic. But it wasn't about surface changes. It was about what people no longer tolerated in silence. And much of that shift traced back to a single moment, a man standing on a yacht, choosing not to shout but to act. He didn't become a celebrity. He didn't want to. He refused awards, declined invitations, skipped every photo shoot. He had nothing to prove. Instead, he taught, not from a podium, from inside. Boardroom after boardroom. He walked in as a consultant, an advisor, sometimes just a shadow on the calendar with no LinkedIn profile. But wherever he went, the same thing happened. Policies were rewritten, rooms were redesigned. Biases once buried in HR handbooks were brought into daylight and cut loose. And still, he stayed mostly unseen. Until one morning, an intern, a young black woman named Eliana, spotted him at the Institute's courtyard. She'd never spoken to him directly, but something in her made her walk over. He was sitting under a tree, reading a thin, worn paperback Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Eliana hesitated, then sat across from him. "Sir," she began, nervous, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, waited. She took a breath. "Do you think they'll ever stop underestimating us?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the book gently, held it in his hands like something delicate. Then he said, "No." Her face fell slightly. She didn't expect that. But then he added, "But that's not the question." She blinked. "Then what is?" He looked her straight in the eye. "What will we do when they do?" Because power isn't built in response to insult. It's built in preparation for freedom. He stood, tucked the book under his arm. "Keep building," he said softly, "especially when they're not looking." Then he walked away, no cameras, no entourage. just footsteps fading into the rhythm of a campus that once didn't exist. And Eliana, she stayed under that tree, staring at the empty seat across from her, thinking not about revenge, but about what she'd build next. Because legacy isn't a statue, it's a blueprint, and his was already in their hands.